Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist podcast and of course to savvydentist.com as well. It's great to have you here, and in this bite-sized episode, we're tackling the subject of risk. Now, this particular topic is very, very important at all times, but 2020 has shown it to be massively important. Risk management is, of course, an essential part of good business management. And the material that I'm going to share with you comes from a workshop that we ran several years ago now. And we've been talking about risk for years in our programs, Practice Max and others. And I really believe that having a framework to think about risk allows us to analyze risk, to mitigate risk, and to then be really confident in our decision making. And of course, in 2020, those people that have done well are those people who've been able to manage that risk and prepare for a downside before it occurs. So I hope you find this episode helpful. I hope you find it engaging. And most importantly, I hope you take action upon it. So here it is. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
One of the fundamental things we're going to be talking about for the next little session is risk and the importance of understanding risk, the importance of identifying risk. And, it's all good to be thinking about the upside, but one of the things that we need to pay particular attention to is the downside and what can possibly go awry. So a fundamental part of that is what we're going to go through now. So the challenge when it comes to risk is sometimes we only see the upside. It's all rainbows and unicorns, and we're thinking, oh, this is amazing. It's going to be good. I'm going to go and buy another practice, and wow, it's going to be all good. But it's not all rainbows and unicorns, and we need to make sure that we are looking at the other side of the equation, of course. Of course, we think it won't happen to us. Just as a small little aside of identifying risk, when we lived in Auchenflower in Brisbane, it's pretty hilly. And my youngest or eldest daughter was learning to ride a bike, and they had one of those, those balance bikes, ones without the pedals. And my wife thought it'd be a really good idea to teach her how to go down a hill. And at the bottom of the hill is a cross street. And I was saying to her, darling, and she's going, what could possibly go wrong? I said, well, we need to mitigate risk, honey. And there's a few big risks in that. So we need to be able to identify that, because if we think it won't happen to us, then, it can do. And of course, we can be asleep at the wheel. If we're not alert to the changing environment, if we're not alert to things that are going on in our surroundings, we can fall asleep at the wheel. And of course, when we're asleep at the wheel, that's when we're likely to have a prang. And ultimately, what we don't see can kill us. We can get blindsided, and it can totally stuff us up. There's been quite a lot of businesses that have been blindsided because they didn't identify risk, they didn't identify the changing marketplaces. And if you think it won't happen in dentistry, I guarantee you it will. It will. Businesses such as Kodak Eastman. Blockbuster had the opportunity to buy Netflix. Yahoo had the opportunity to buy Google. Really? These are businesses that had they, really been conscious of risk and mitigating risk, they would have been able to do all these things and be better. All right, so what we really want, of course, is we want to be able to take a reality check. Okay? Is it the red pill or the blue pill? Blue for bliss, rainbows and sunshine? Or red for reality, so we can see things as they really are? What's going on there? We need to have checks and balances. And part of this is the boardroom thinking is, when we think about the types of hats we might wear, sometimes it's about hold your horses. It's about slow down, and really think it through. And that's a fundamental thing, is having checks and balances in place. So we need to be able to make sure we've got guardrails so we don't go off into the bushes. And we need to be vigilant. We need to have eyes like a hawk. We need to be all over this and be alert. Okay? And candidly, we want to make sure all our bases are covered. So let's get into it. The mindset really around this is that defense is the best offense. Okay? And we want to make sure that we can defend against changing circumstances, changing market conditions. And one of my mentors, a guy called Keith, one of his great sayings is, all my bad ideas started off as a good idea. All my bad ideas started off as a good idea. Now, let me ask you a question, just to reflect upon for a moment. If you could unwind any 3 financial transactions in your life, how much better off would you be? Any 3 financial transactions, how much better off would you be? Now, I can tell you, for me, that's over $1 million. And it's because of, in the past, we weren't as good at risk management, identifying risk, mitigating risk. And I guarantee you, every single one of you here would be better off if you could unwind any 3 transactions. Okay? It may not be as much as mine, but ultimately you would be better off as well. So big principles when it comes to risk, of course, is we want to look up. We want to get out of the surgery and look up and survey our surroundings. We've got to be able to take our head out of people's mouths and look around and see what's really going on. I want you to be able to challenge assumptions and ask yourself questions. What don't I see? What am I taking for granted? What things do I hold to be true that may not be true? Where are my blockages? What are the things that are holding me back? And of course, that leads to be able to identify blind spots. We need to be able to mitigate risk. We've got to be able to identify the risk, but we've also got to be able to mitigate the risk. I want to tell you a story about some fire jumpers. So in the 1920s or 30s in America, they used to have these guys who would parachute out of planes and into the areas where there was bushfires, and they'd parachute in with all their gear. And this particular fire was at a place called Man Gulch. And what ended up happening was the jumpers jumped into the fire, and of course the wind changed, and the fire turned back upon them. And so these firefighters were retreating until they met a precipice. And what ended up happening is, I think there was 13 firefighters from memory, and of those firefighters, 9 or 10 of them died because they were trying to climb up the precipice with their firefighting equipment on. They didn't take the gear off. They didn't shed the stuff that was no longer useful to them. So as we go through our practice journey, we've got to be able to shed the things that no longer serve us. And part of that is being able to mitigate risk and get rid of stuff, jettison things that no longer work.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.